Okay, so we will go ahead and I'm going to introduce our first presenter of the day. Anoushka Alexander-Rose is a PhD student in English at the Parks Institute for the Study of Jewish, Non-Jewish Relations at the University of Southampton. And her thesis is titled Vladimir Nabokov's Jewish Muse. So take it away, Anoushka.
Thank you. Oh no, I'm afraid that's not correct. 1 minute, I've got no idea now how to. Sorry. I don't know how to make it so that it's not. So it's and I need to have my thing on. So is it okay as it is like that?
We can certainly see it, I think.
Yeah. I don't.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just start. Thank you, everyone. So the brief for this Nabokov online seminar was to choose a short passage from Nabokov and to offer a close reading of that passage, which reveals something new and interesting. In a way, it asks us to disavow Nabokov's authorial intentions, rejecting the interpretations offered by him and by existing scholarship. This suggests that there are still yet new and interesting things to be found in Nabokov's works, whether they are pieces that previous readers have missed, or even better, that the author himself did not identify or intend. The idea that one's creative mind can produce meanings unintentionally is best expressed through the existence of our subconscious or dreams. We may wake up from a fitful sleep having been unfaithful, violent, or some other uncharacteristic yet shameful behavior and tell ourselves, well, that wasn't really me, or I don't actually think like that. So too may an author distance themselves from foreign or previously unperceived meanings or messages in their fiction. We can see this exemplified in the introduction Nabokov took when publishing his Russian fiction in translation in the United States, using a paratextual method to inform the reader of best practice of how to approach the novel or story. Yet, Nabokov in 1964 also undertook an 80-day experiment of writing down his dreams as soon as he woke up, in an attempt to prove a theory of predictive dreams. He was informed by theories established by John William Dunn in an experiment with time, and these dreams have since been published with accompanying analysis by the late Gennady Barabtalo, but others have otherwise not attracted the attention of much other current scholarship. In producing this dream diary, Nabokov opened up the suggestion that his unconscious thoughts could be seen as part of his literary output, intentional pieces of writing, which could be exposed to close reading. In addition to one's unconscious thoughts and dreams, there are things that we simply don't want to be subjected to close reading, moments from the past, traumas, or embarrassments. There are examples of this in Nabokov's life and writing. In Speak Memory, he admits of his childhood tutor Philip Zelensky, I do not know and would rather not imagine what happened to him during the Nazi invasion of France. And on his brother Sergei, for various reasons, I find it inordinately hard to speak about my other brother. In addition to these instances, which often relate to his processing or not processing of grief, Nabokov also prescribes against certain ways of reading his fiction, namely through psychoanalytical or political interpretations. In his introduction to the English translation of Mashenka, Nabokov dictates, although an ass might argue that orange is the Honoric anagram of organ, I would not advise members of the Viennese delegation to lose precious time analysing Clara's dream at the end of chapter 4 in the present book. A reader only naturally reads this passage with added attention. It is certainly not a challenge to psychoanalyze Nabokov's distaste for psychoanalysis. For an author who so emphatically discredits Freudian theory as lazy, ignorant, and crude, he certainly talks about him a lot. Straightforwardly, we can closely read Nabokov's refusal to close read his own trauma, the workings of his subconscious and obsessive rejection of psychoanalysis. I aim to show how Nabokov's characterization of dreaming as an inadequate way of reaching the other world is undermined extensively throughout his fiction and life writing. Moreover, I will demonstrate how each act of dreaming works through particular trauma and shame, often associated with difficult figures or events that Nabokov would rather not address in his conscious mind, and also quite often related to Jewish experiences. Now, to close reading. In Speak Memory, at the end of chapter 2, Nabokov states, whenever in my dreams I see the dead, they always appear silent, bothered, strangely depressed, quite unlike their dear, bright selves. I am aware of them without any astonishment, in surroundings they never visited during their earthly existence, in the house of some friend of mine they never knew. They sit apart, frowning at the floor, as if death were a dark taint, a shameful family secret. It is certainly not then, not in dreams, but when one is wide awake, at moments of robust joy and achievement, on the highest terrace of consciousness, the mortality has a chance to peer beyond its own limits, from the mast, from the past, and its castle tower. And although nothing much can be seen through the mist, there is somehow the blissful feeling that one is looking in the right direction. Michael Wood suggests that this invites a double meaning, that the high terrace is spectacular, but of course the dreams have also their portion of truth. The dear dead are unlike themselves because they are dead, which is precisely the hindrance the dreamer wishes to ignore. He highlights how repression of the subconscious and authorial intention are at play in close reading dreams themselves, expressing what the dreamer wishes to ignore. Although Nabokov states that dreams are dull, muted representations of life, this perhaps more reflects the fact that the features are dead rather than the dreams themselves. Nevertheless, he repeatedly employs dreams and subconscious imaginings to remember his father, his brother, and other figures of the past in life and fiction, often those victims to political and historical atrocities. Employing a close reading of this extract from Speak Memory often offers connections to some of Nabokov's other texts, demonstrating how he uses dreams to process grief and trauma, and often through the register of Jewish experience. In the first line, Nabokov reveals the frequent phenomenon of seeing the dead in his dreams in an increasingly fractured sentence full of building clauses. This use of a syndeton animates the act of dreaming itself, in which images are layered on top of each other, seemingly nonsensically, creating a palimpsest collage of the subconscious. It replicates the tumbling together of grief, especially that of multiple people, all individually significant and given their own clause, yet together an exponentially overwhelming accumulation. We can see Nabokov use this particular literary device in both Pnin and in The Gift. Near the beginning of the novel, Pnin is subjected to a brief vision, a seizure-induced hallucination, in which, amidst the lecture hall, murdered, forgotten, unrevenged, incorrupt, immortal, many old friends were scattered. Those featured include the first sighting of Mira Bolochkin, shyly smiling, sleek dark head inclined, gentle brown gaze shining up at Pnin from under velvet eyebrows, Vanya Bidnyashkin gaily signalling to his former schoolmate, and his parents, both a little blurred but on the whole wonderfully recovered from their obscure dissolution, looked at their son with the same life-consuming passion and pride that they had looked at him with that night in 1912. The dead that Pnin sees are, in fact, very much like their dear, bright selves, although in surroundings that they would have been wholly unfamiliar to them in life. The figures from Pnin's past are part of history and politics. Their deaths are framed through ethics and morality. It is later revealed that Mira was killed in Buchenwald, and Vanya was shot by the Reds in 1919 in Odessa because his father had been a liberal. These kinds of deaths are not unfamiliar to Nabokov, whose father was victim to a mistaken political assassination, and brother Sergei subjected to Nazi persecution. For such traumatic ends, where the exact circumstances of each death are unknown, premature, and uncontrollable, the workings of the subconscious may take over to fill in the gaps of grief. Perhaps Nabokov uses fiction to recharacterize his dreams. Whilst the dead he sees in his sleep are silent, bothered, strangely depressed, in his writing, figures of the past can be animated as they were in life. This suggests that the potential for literature is creating a space for Nabokov to work through his personal trauma and feelings of guilt and grief in explicitly psychoanalytical terms. Returning to Speak Memory, Nabokov comments on how in his dreams he is aware of the dead in surroundings they never visited during their earthly existence. This earthly existence alludes back to a scene in The Gift where Fyodor dreams of his father's return, unharmed, whole, human, and real. Fyodor goes to hug him, there swelled and ecstatically happy, living enormous paradisal warmth. Here again we can identify two instances of asyndeton which produce an effective, overwhelming emotional response through the registers of grief, dreaming, the other world, and the subconscious. However, when Fyodor comes to it and realizes he is actually looking at a window and no longer dreaming, he proclaims, "Such is the treaty with reason, the theatre of earthly habit, the livery of temporary substance. He tried to overtake a fugitive sense, but the new dream he dreamt is an uninspired compilation, stitched together out of remnants of daytime life and fitted to it. Nabokov suggests a hierarchy of dreams, some which illusorily and convincingly resurrect the dead, others which weakly attempt and fail to mimic the act of creating and memory-making itself. Fyodor's father is conjured not to an unfamiliar location with unfamiliar people, but home, to where exactly he should return. Yet his warmth is paradisal, associating his presence with angels and a religious afterlife, building on Nabokov's previous treatments of the death of his own father with biblical imagery. It is only after Fyodor awakens that he is reminded of earthliness, although deeply aware of the artifice of real life too, and its theatricality. Nabokov imagines the dead sitting apart, frowning at the floor, as if death were a dark taint, a shameful family secret. In a memoir which so obliquely deals with the life and death of Nabokov's brother Sergei, whose homosexuality was exposed in childhood, and who met his fate only once Nabokov had fled to safety without a goodbye, maybe this is the dark taint on the author's mind. The refusal to face this guilt and grief recalls a statement offered by Iris Black in Look at the Harlequins, Nabokov's final novel, in which he attempts to expose hidden meanings decided too esoteric for his readers, and where he engages in theories and parodies of his own authorship, throwing off the shackles of subtextual markers. Describing her brother, Iris claims that he conceals our ancestry like a dark treasure, yet will flare up publicly if someone calls someone a Shylock. Ivor's shame about his own Jewish identity compels him to act in contradiction, a duality that is perhaps best at home in the world of dreams. Nabokov assumes a position of control here, much like his outing of Sergei, finding his diary and giving it to their tutor. He has the power to expose the Jewishness of Ivor Black despite his desire to conceal that part of his ancestry. Both these identities belong to sticky histories, with those bearing its marks condemned to persecution, humiliation, discrimination, and even death. Yet they are in other ways similarly invisible, exposed unwillingly or inaccurately through sham science, but with the possibility to some extent of concealing or assimilating. Nabokov implicates Jewishness and homosexuality in his description of death as a shameful family secret. Yet, whilst he can as an author control the death, Jewishness, and homosexuality of his characters, in his own life he is at mercy to the assassination of his father, the murder of his brother, and the danger that threatened his Jewish wife and son. Ivor's attitude towards his own Jewishness is in ways not dissimilar to Vera Nabokov's. Leonid Livak describes her Jewishness as reactive. While she was adamantly proud of her heritage in the face of discrimination, she equally expressed shame, distaste, and elitism, particularly towards American Jews, perhaps seeing her cultural, refined Jewishness as superior. Moreover, when Nabokov in his fiction employs the registers of dreams and subconscious to process grief, he often does this through the registers of Jewish death and tragedy, particularly after the Holocaust. In Lolita, Humbert Humbert's daymares and insomnias are replete with images of the camps, and Penin experiences hallucinatory spasms, forcing him to confront the possible deaths of Mira Bolochkin at the hands of Nazi brutality. The passage in Speak Memory ends with a feeble attempt at moralizing. Nabokov claims that it is only on the highest terrace of consciousness that mortality has a chance to peer beyond its own limits, from the mast, from the past, and its castle tower. Whereas before Nabokov is engaged with specific characters from his life and work, here mortality itself is anthropomorphized, a unifying representation of all the dead he sees in his dreams. Is the castle tower it looks out from the same as the ivory tower from which Nabokov told his sister to come down from, as there are things which wound one too deeply, for example, German atrocities and the burning of children in ovens? This suggests that the capacity of dreams and the subconscious to experience and process grief is no longer possible after the Holocaust. Following the death of his father, Nabokov wrote him into short stories and novels as a way of resurrecting him, working through. These father figures appear animated, paradisal, alive. It is possible to relax into one's subconscious to communicate with the otherworld. Yet, when one's death is but one in an unprecedentedly vast and effective murder machine, with not only political leaders as targets but innocent children, it is no longer an option to simply dream and write of dreams. What previously was possible in the idle limits of sleep is now expelled into the realms of daymares and insomnias or seizure-induced hallucinations, active states of the working imagination. However, Nabokov does not suggest a complete transformation of his literary agenda into activism and politics, dealing with ethics and morality. His proposal of coming down from one's ivory tower is still aesthetic and self-serving. The passage ends, and although nothing much can be seen through the mist, there is somehow the blissful feeling that one is looking in the right direction. Peering beyond the limits of dreams produces a blissful feeling of virtue in the absence of action. Even after the brutality of the Holocaust compels Nabokov to come down from his ivory tower, he refuses to submit his literature to political, historical, and ethical readings. Mortality can only peer beyond its own limits, not immerse themselves in them. To return to my initial close reading, final minute, this passage speaks to a question of how to read Nabokov, how he wants to be read, and how he doesn't want to be read. We are introduced to a possibility that what, in the words of Michael Wood, the dreamer wishes to ignore is precisely what demands our attention. The vehicles of dreams and the subconscious act as ways to connect to the dead. The associations of this grief with the Jewish experience and homosexuality bring together dual feelings of shame and guilt, those dark taints, suggesting how both are areas that Nabokov wishes to ignore and can only work through in his subconscious. In closely reading against how Nabokov wants to be closely read, I demonstrate that the realms of psychoanalysis, politics, and history can uncover new and interesting things in his works. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anoushka. That was wonderful. Excellent work and lots to talk about. All right, we will go on to our next presenter. Steve Blackwell is a past president of the IBNS, author of many important articles and works and books on Nabokov. He has been thinking about and writing about Nabokov for over 30 years, and we're fortunate to have him here presenting today. So take it away, Steve.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Matt. So I hope I'm right that there aren't really any rules for how we approach these things today. My memory is that one of our options is to be very informal, and I chose option one, being very informal. This will not be an organized or cogent academic presentation. It will be just me riffing a bit on some ideas I have. I had a hard time choosing between a few things that I wanted to talk about or might have talked about. It was very hard to choose. But I did want to choose something that is a passage that we don't look at very often. I really like the idea of having us try to look at things that we've been neglecting. I do think there's a lot that's been neglected in Nabokov that's not very far down, not very much lower in value than the things that we look at over and over again. So the little bit that I today is pretty much, I mean, I don't want to say it's ignored, but it's not something that we see quoted and discussed very often. So I'm showing this in a document file. I hope it's visible and legible. How does that seem? Look pretty good? Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so the passage I've got is the closing couple of paragraphs of the story Beneficence, Благость in Russian. And I think I'll just start out by reading it, and then I'll talk about why I wanted to bring attention to it. It grew dark. The rain was gusting. The wind greeted me turbulently at every corner. A streetcar clanged past, its windows agleam with amber, its interior filled with black silhouettes. I hopped aboard as it passed and began drying my rain-soaked hands. The people in the car looked sullen and swayed sleepily. The black window panes were specked with a multitude of minute raindrops, like a night sky overcast with a beadwork of stars. We were clattering along a street lined with noisy chestnut trees, and I kept imagining that the humid boughs were lashing the windows. And when the tram halted, one could hear overhead the chestnuts plucked by the wind knocking against the roof. Knock, then again resiliently, gently, knock, knock. The tram would chime and start, the gleam of the street lamps shattered in the webbed glass, and with a sensation of poignant happiness, I awaited the repetition of those meek, lofty sounds. The brakes slammed on for a stop. Again, a round, solitary chestnut dropped, and after a moment, Another thumped and rolled along the roof. Knock, knock. So many of you know I've been working on trees, and maybe I chose this passage because there's a tree in it. I barely talk about this tree in the upcoming book, but I seem to remember it comes in there somewhere, because as I was preparing, I once again came across the fact that Maxim Schreier, and many of you may remember this, he talks about this passage and discovers in it an echo of a letter that Nabokov wrote to Ivan Bunin, where these chestnut trees and their chestnuts that are falling off onto the street are mentioned. So the story was written apparently in March, at least according to Brian Boyd, in March of 2024 and published in April 2024. If I remember,
1924.
Sorry, 19, all 19s. Thank you, Marie. So 1919, and the letter to Bunin was from 1922. And so in the letter to Bunin, as Maxim Schreier reminds us, he was explaining to Bunin where he was when he was inspired by a poem that he wrote and dedicated to Bunin, which was published in 1921. So that's just sort of historical background. But what really draws my attention about this passage, certainly the trees, because I'm finding meaningful elements in trees in almost every, well, it's probably too much to say every passage where I see them, but many, many passages. Nabokov is using trees to emphasize one thing or another that's important to him while he's writing, and it's not always predictable what exactly he's doing. But so in his discussion, Maxim was talking about the idea of this moment on the tram, hearing the chestnuts knocking and falling as an example of cosmic synchronization. And I think that's accurate and a good example of that. And maybe I want to just sort of zoom in and think about it in a little bit more detail and think about I want to show some echoes of this scene elsewhere in the works too. But without thinking too much just about the cosmic part and the synchronization part, just what might be happening, how might Nabokov be thinking about this moment? So if you remember the story, or if you don't remember the story, Beneficence, it's about an artist who's a sculptor, and he's been left by his I guess, girlfriend, or at least they've had a separation of a couple of weeks, and they're going to have a reunion. She's promised to come, but she never comes. And then this is part of his journey home. And during his journey home, and even while he's waiting for her and she's not coming, he knows she's not going to come, and he's experiencing, it seems, lots of joyful perceptions of the world around him, and he's certainly experiencing joyful things on this tram ride. So it's very interesting that on the one hand, he's experiencing the loss of the end of this relationship, and simultaneous with that loss, he's noticing so many things in the world around him. And these things are, although he's a sculptor, it seems he's a sculptor primarily of human form, all of these things that he's noticing around him are thrilling him and are inspiring him in different ways, including these chestnuts. So the tram is rushing through the night, and I can highlight this part, right? I kept imagining that the humid boughs were lashing the windows, right? And the chestnuts are plucked and they're knocking against the roof. So he's in the tram and he's seeing the water droplets, and he's imagining lashings of tree branches, and he's hearing the knockings of the nuts hitting the roof, and especially when the tram stops, that knocking sound that he pays attention to. And what really strikes me about this is it's those knocks, the fact that here are these nuts that are falling out of the trees and hitting the roof of the tram. I started thinking about them as, in a way, I mean, there's some interesting metaphor here for something hitting a surface from the outside, right? And so if we think of the tram as a kind of a displacement of his consciousness, the chestnuts are some kind of maybe image of things coming to consciousness from the outside. And so that's really what we see going on in this story. Although he's being left, he's been abandoned by his partner. He's losing the relationship. His consciousness is not focusing inside. It's focusing or on his pain or on his grief over the loss. It's focusing on everything outside, and then all of that outside material is concentrated into these chestnuts. And the really, I guess we could say, poetic activity they play, the role that they play by thumping on the roof of the tram, which for him becomes such a focal point and such a point of fascination and a very, I would call it a quiet joy, because we feel the joy, but he doesn't express it as joy in words. So that's interesting too. So this story is interesting and instructive in the way it juxtaposes both loss, the loss of the relationship, the loss of a loved one in that sense, but also the gain through attention to the outside world. And in this case, the outside world comes knocking by hurling itself and lashing the tram and knocking on the roof of the tram with the chestnuts. So then I just wanted to offer a couple of other examples, places where something not exactly the same happens, but similar enough that it's an interesting kind of echo. So this is a scene from the story, a little moment from the story, The Circle. So things that drop out of the sky, there must be something useful that we all can try to discover about what Nabokov does with things that drop out of the sky. This sentence from The Circle is one that I've always been fascinated by, because he sets it off as a single paragraph. Rotating in slow descent, the winged fruit of a linden lit on the tablecloth. And those of you who read it in Russian might know that this fruit of a linden he gives in Russian as lipovy litunok, which is a litunok is a neologism in Russian. You won't find that word. If you search for that word, it only comes up in this story. A little flying thingy would perhaps be a translation for the word. That's why he had to translate it winged fruit of a linden, because there's no good way to put this word in English. At any rate, it's a very marked moment in the story. It's a story that I've written about before, and I've suggested that it's a story that's got a kind of a hidden tale of loss within it as well. So another interesting example of very intense loss concealed within the story, and then here's something falling out of the sky in a very marked way in this story, because it's rotating slowly, cinematically, and then it lit on the tablecloth, or it lands on the tablecloth. It's a very beautiful scene. And it's echoed in Speak Memory during a birthday party, where in the lantern slides scene, chapter near the end, when he's got a big party going on, and he's sort of got the fade-ins and fade-outs of all the different tutors who are around the table. And during the course of that description, he says, "I note the small helicopter of a revolving Samara that gently descends upon the tablecloth." So a very clear echo of exactly that visualized scene that occurs in The Circle. And so also a chapter that's very intensely involved with both, well, anticipatory loss, I guess we could say, but of course, from the standpoint of the writer, loss that's already occurred when he's writing that chapter. The loss of the implied loss of the tutor Lenski, and the about to be celebrated loss of his father, because the next chapter in the memoir is about his father. And then I was looking at Brian's new Ada annotations, and I just happened to notice in that page that he was just annotating that he had quoted this line and made a comment about it. But here's Van, or about Van, right? He looked around. Van has found that he's unable to make himself go to his mother's funeral. There are a variety of reasons why he doesn't go. And he must be feeling guilty. And it says, he looked around, making wild amends, willing her spirit to give him an unequivocal and indeed all-deciding sign of continued being behind the veil of time, beyond the flesh of space. But no response came. Not a petal fell on his bench. And there's again that idea of something falling from the sky and landing nearby, except in this case, it doesn't happen. I guess just a last little kind of a final miniature comment, that the story that I started with, or the close of that story, Beneficence, was written very close to the 2-year anniversary of Nabokov's father's death. And I can't help wondering if there's some bit of association there, if he was thinking in terms of that anniversary. On the other hand, it's also true that already by that time he was associating chestnuts with Vera, the poem that he wrote right after one of their first rendezvous after they had met each other previously at the ball. So the poem called the Encounter, or I forget the usual translation for it, but Встреча is the Russian poem, also features the fact that they were strolling among chestnut trees on the street that night. So the chestnuts for him could be pointing in 2 directions if he's thinking autobiographically at the same time that he's posing things artistically. So it feels like there's an awful lot going on here, and it seems fun and beautiful. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Again, lots to think about. I love those associations. All right, our next presenter is Marie Bouchet. Marie is a professor of American literature at the University of Toulouse, France, and the current president of the IVNS. She's also treasurer of the French Vladimir Nabokov Society. She published a book on Lolita and its film adaptation by Kubrick in 2009, and co-edited 2 journal issues of Miranda on Lolita and a collection of essays called The 5 Senses in Nabokov's works. Her forthcoming book is entitled Nabokov's Poetics of the Everyday, an Entomology of the Ordinary, and she will be presenting a sample of her work for that book during today's seminar. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Thanks, Matt. Thank everybody for being here tonight, or today, I guess for some people it's tonight for us in Europe. So I'll be talking about Lolita, not exactly the least spoken of Nabokov novels, but I want to focus on Charlotte for a change, and on a text taken from
Marie, we're only seeing part. We're seeing part of your screen. It's like cut off.
Really? I'm gonna do this.
Can you make
Let's see. Stop
smaller?
sharing. Let's see. That's strange. How is that? Why is that like this? All right, let's try again. Is it better? Nope.
Just
Okay.
yes.
It's normally it should be on this side.
That's good.
Maybe it's good. Can you guys see it now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well,
Who knows?
that's the moment when just after the wedding of Humbert and Charlotte, it's the moment when she enjoys their newlyweds life, and she starts to glorify the home. So I'm going to quote the passage I'm going to be dealing with tonight. With the zest of a banal young bride, she started to glorify the home, knowing as I did its every cranny by heart since those days when, oh, sorry, excuse me, I should use my, I can see with this share stuff. Oh, sorry. Since those days, when I had, can't take that off. Can I move this? Okay. When for my chair, I mentally mapped out how Lolita's course through the house. I had only entered into a sort of emotional relationship with it, with its very ugliness and dirt. And now I could almost feel the wretched thing cower in its reluctance to endure the bath of ecru and ochre and putty buff and snuff that Charlotte planned to give it. She never got as far as that, thank God, but she did use up a tremendous amount of energy in washing window shades, waxing the slides of Venetian blinds, purchasing new shades and new blinds, returning them to the store, placing them by others, and so on, in a constant chiaroscuro of smiles and frowns and doubts and pouts. She dabbled in cretones and chintzes. She changed the colors of the sofa. The sacred sofa where a bubble of paradise had once burst in slow motion within me. She rearranged the furniture, and was pleased when she found in a household treatise that it is permissible to separate a pair of sofa commodes and their companion lamps. With the authoress of Your Home is You, she developed a hatred for little lean chairs and spindle tables. She believed that a room having a generous expanse of glass and lots of rich wood paneling was an example of the masculine type of room, whereas the feminine type was characterized by leather-looking windows and frailer woodwork. The novels I had found her reading when I moved in were now replaced by illustrated catalogs and homemaking guides. From a firm located at 4640 Roosevelt Boulevard, Philadelphia, she ordered for our double bed a damask-covered 312 coil mattress, although the old one seemed to me resilient and durable enough for whatever it had to support. So that's the message I'd like to deal with tonight. As you know, Nabokov loves for us to play the game, the referential game between the real and the fictitious. But in Lolita, that game is particularly perverse because using the real world is one of the tools that Humbert uses to exploit and exploits to win our sympathy by debasing the characters he abuses. So, of course, that's one of those examples when he makes his manipulation of gullible and lofter Charlotte acceptable to the reader by constantly lacing in descriptions of her and her actions with irony. Of course, his detachment as a foreigner, his foreigner's perspective, mirrors that of Nabokov's when he himself arrived in the United States. And indeed, we find in Humbert, in his narrative, the typically Nabokovian minute observation of suburban vulgarity and American consumerism. One sees in these sparkling new products of homemaking. There is another passage where it describes the kitchen, but here, for example, for the double bed, she ordered. Okay, not work. Can change my yes. She ordered that mattress there in the firm located at 4640 Roosevelt Boulevard in Philadelphia, which turns out to be still in existence at the same address in 2024. There's still a mattress store there. But of course, the inclusion of the very words of American consumer society and the omnipresence of the lexical fields of business and purchases throughout the novel provide the backdrop against which the story unfolds. And indeed, as Humbert notices, in the Hayes-Humbert house, novels have now been replaced by illustrated catalogs and homemaking guides, reflecting the omnipresence of these consumerist objects into the living space, but also the invasion of the terms related to consumerism into the textual space. The text consequently bears visible affinities with the very catalogs and magazines that it mentions. And that portrait of Charlotte as the ideal homemaker, there's another moment when she prepares the breakfast, and here she's, fixing her house. Here, Humbert follows a literary convention, which is, by describing the house of a character, you're telling us who the character is. There is, of course, this amazing description of the Gatsby house before we see Gatsby first. So it is a topos in literature. But here, we could say that he even insists on his use of that topos by mentioning the fictitious title of that homemaking book, Your Home is You. That's the topos, Your Home is You. But here, at the same time, he debunks the topos because in the case of Charlotte, it's the book that dictates to her what her home should look like according to the fashion and standard of the time. Oh, sorry, what was that? Yes. She rearranged the furniture and was pleased when she found in a household treatise that it is permissible to separate a pair of sofa commodes and their companion lamps, etc., etc. I'm going to go into more details later. Hold on. So this ironically shows that her home is not really her, but rather her personality has completely surrendered to the prescriptions of homemaking guides and catalogs. Because of the wealth of options offered in these publications, her tastes and decisions are unstable, as implied by the painterly metaphor of the chiaroscuro of smiles and frowns and doubts and pouts, or by the sentence, she did use up a tremendous amount of energy in washing window shades, waxing the slats of Venetian blinds, purchasing new shades and new blinds, returning them to the store, replacing them by others, and so on, in a constant girl's tour, etc. Charlotte's repetitive and almost compulsive actions are rendered through very many humorous alliterations and in were and these assonance in ing, and through the repetitions, which are paired with the lexical field of repetition itself, new, returning, replacing, others, and so on. So the cumulative effect produced by this impressive array of repetitions at all levels, phonemic, syntactic, lexical, enhances the comic nature of the text and reinforces the reader's sympathy for Humbert. This ironical portrait of Charlotte subtly magnifies, by implied contrast, Humbert's good taste and his witty humor. And as we know, the narrator constantly pits his own European sense of style and his highbrow culture against America's omnipresent posh lust. I would like to go back on the term chiaroscuro that is used here to qualify Charlotte's indecisive nature when it comes to make a decision for herself. I think this word is interesting because the whole of Humbert's text could be viewed as a chiaroscuro, for all its brightest prose always conceals his obscure designs, his umber and black umberland. And by denouncing the dullness of American consumerism and the foolish belief in the manipulative language of marketing, Nabokov indicates that everything should be viewed as a chiaroscuro, the deep complexity of this dark light. The comic description of Charlotte as a homemaker, which prepares for later scenes in which Humbert endeavors to conceal the least attractive aspect of his personality, already provides the attentive readers with elements that help see through the fancy prose style and the manipulative strategies. But I would like to focus now on those very words from American consumer society that invade the novel's linguistic fabric, just like the commercial publications invade the Hayes house. What we see indeed is that the growing presence of lexical fields related to businesses and purchase bears affinities with the very catalogs that are mentioned in the text. And in this chapter, in the text I want to focus on today, we have a very interesting use or the reuse of sources that Nabokov found probably in the homes where he was staying, in those homes he was renting during the semester while the colleagues were on sabbatical leave. So the famous book, ironically entitled "The Home Is You," is actually based on a very widespread book of homemaking called The Searchlight Homemaking Guide, published in 1949. This book is a compilation of information and advice written by a team of female journalists, mostly from the magazine Home Economics, and assembled by a lady called Ida Miglio, one of the authors of the book. It tells housewives what to do regarding all that was expected of a respectable homemaker of the time, and also ensuring she was busy enough to be confined to the domestic sphere. So the program includes, and maybe you can see this on the side, but I'm going to read it to you: etiquette, weddings, setting a table, serving meals, menus, cooking for large groups, exercise and good looks, the sick room, the physical care of the baby, the mental health of a child, building the home, floors, woodworks and walls, furnishing the home, buying fabrics, buying household equipment, the laundry, destroying household pests. These are the chapters. In the preparatory notes to the novel kept at the manuscript division of the Library of Congress, there is an index card with notes from this book, but not from the chapter called Furnishing the Home, which inspired the excerpt under scrutiny tonight. So from that chapter called Furnishing the Home, Nabokov picked a selection of quotes and expressions that are inserted in the novel. So the borrowings are, in bold here. Waxing the slats of Venetian blinds, purchasing new shades and new blinds, cretones and chintzes, It is permissible to separate a pair of sofa commodes and their companion lamps. These are all quotes that are quote unquote lifted from the Searchlight homemaking guide. And probably amused by the contemptuous tone of the authoress when she claims that large rooms sometimes lack character because they are filled with small chairs and spindling tables, Nabokov hyperbolically transformed that contempt into sheer hatred. We're told with the authoress of Yomisu, she developed a hatred for lean chairs and spindle tables. So you'll note how from the first text, the text from the Searchlight, which was spindling tables, Nabokov transferred that into spindle to achieve, the effect of spindle table rather than spindling table. He also edited and reworded sentences from two particularly sexist and stereotypical paragraphs from the book. That's the sentence in italics at the end. I'm going to show you. So she believed that a room having a generous expanse of glass and lots of rich wood paneling was an example of the masculine type of room, whereas the feminine type was characterized by lighter looking windows and frilly woodwork. Actually, in the Searchlight homemaking guide, this is what we find. A room having a great expanse of sorry. Oh, this is painful. I can't read with that Zoom stuff on top. Of leaded plate or plain glass, white heavy molding, and a quantity of wood paneling is an example of the masculine type. Feminine room is one that has less massive windows, woodwork that is not heavy in appearance, and light, airy wall coverings. So now, if we look at what Nabokov did, to move this thing again, the changes that he performed are in bold, and I would like to quickly comment on those changes. So we'll see that he replaced great with generous, and it added the adjective rich, a generous expanse of glass and lots of rich wood paneling, which I would interpret as reinforcing the cliche of the source of income always being male. And also he substituted less massive and not heavy, oh, I forgot to put that in bold, for lighter looking and frailer, also somehow contributing to heighten the supposed fragile nature of women, lighter looking and frail. With these subtle changes, what these subtle changes illustrate is Nabokov's reworking of the signifiers from non-literary text into his own major poetic registry, not to sublimate the ideology of the textual sources, but to make readers taste that ideology from within and indicate its shortcomings via a subtle destabilization of the source text. I think I'm done. Yes, so that's what I need to illustrate. I don't have time to cover another little piece I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to show you how, yes, this was, yes, that's it. Good, yes, that's it. Stop sharing. That's what I wanted to share with you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Fascinating. And we love all those source work things. All right, our last presenter is Shoshana Milgram Knapp. She is an associate professor of English at Virginia Tech, teaches detective fiction, science fiction, the Bible as literature, comparative literature, and literature and film, in addition to usual period and genre courses. That sounds like a lot. Her publications have included articles on George Sand and George Eliot, John Steinbeck and John Fowles, Herbert Spencer and W.T. Stead, Dostoevsky and Richard Wright, and Vladimir Nabokov in his own right, and in relation to Victor Hugo and Ayn Rand. So take it away, Shoshana.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. And what I wanted to do today was to choose a passage that I've enjoyed and one that I suspected might not yet have been enjoyed as much by anyone else. And I wanted to invite you to play along with me. I'm going to be looking at a paragraph in Nabokov's commentary on Onegin, and it's from the second volume. And, oh, here we go. You've got my chat up there, but I need to get back to what I want to read. Okay, Sorry. Okay, it's from Book 6, stanza 21, and it's the famous Liensky Lament, the one that Tchaikovsky took seriously and made a meal of in the aria and the opera. And you know it. It's the poem written by the doomed Vladimir Liensky night before his duel. And what happens here, as I'm sure you remember, is that Nabokov goes through the poem and points out a fair number of words and phrases and images that can easily be found elsewhere in literature, as he puts it, quote, in the course of casual reading, unquote. Now, I don't know if Nabokov ever did a course of casual reading, but he goes through a catalog. But then he concentrated on his translation of 2 words in line 11 from that stanza. And he says, I've been influenced in my choice of rendering Wsio blaga, blaga meaning the good, the beneficial, all that contributes to human felicity, by Pope's Leibnizian all is right, known to Pushkin through Voltaire's ironical refrain, tout est bon, tout est bien, in his pamphlet novel Candide ou l'Optimisme. See, for instance, chapters 10, 19, and 24. Okay, so what do we have here? Well, he explains why he translated it the way he did. He manages to work in a drive-by insult because characterizing something as a pamphlet novel is derogatory. He's disparaging Candide as a hybrid or a cross between propaganda and prose fiction rather than as a work of art. I think we can let that go for now. David Rampton's written a very fine essay about Nabokov and the references in the Onegin commentary to French writers, including Voltaire. But for now, Nabokov has given us some homework. He tells us where to look in that pamphlet novel, and I did. And I found something like the phrases, although the tout est bien, tout est bon is not there as many times as he says it is. We do have versions of it. We've got Le meilleur des univers possibles. We've got, in English, it's easier for me, saying that everything is good when things are not good. And of course, it does start with chapter 1. But here's the thing. It's not exactly a refrain, even in Candide. It is ironical, but it's not a refrain. So there's a little bit of an insult there as well. But then Nabokov temporarily drops Voltaire and proceeds to the earlier source, Alexander Pope. And this is the part that I thought was really lovely here. He says, Pope's line, an essay on man, epistle 1:1-294 goes, one truth is clear, whatever is right. Right. Whatever is right. So Nabokov's point is that Pushkin read Voltaire's distortion, all is good, and therefore used Blaga in Liensky's poem, but Nabokov himself, for the translation, is going back to the earlier source and writing as Pope did, all's right. So I thought that was really sort of a subtle way of saying, I'm going to fix this. Even though you could say, well, maybe the flaw is Liensky's or whatever, but Pushkin's, but Nabokov's going to fix it and go back to Pope. And then Nabokov keeps going, and he says, in case you wondered, see also essay, epistle for the first hemistich of 145 and the second of 394. Well, he didn't actually have to use the technical term for the first half of the second half of a verse, but I think he enjoyed doing it. And I looked them up, and indeed, that whatever is right does indeed appear in these other places in the essay on man. Well, you see, in context, what Pope is saying is an important point. Maybe a much more important point than anything that Linsky is referring to or that Pushkin is referring to for Linsky. He's saying, and I could read you the verses, or I'll just summarize, as we're getting close to the end of the time before discussion. If you believe, Pope says, that you see chance or discord or partial evil, that's not really what's there. You're not really seeing the clear truth. The clear truth is that whatever is right. So if you go back to Pope, you get to that point. Now, I also noticed, I thought it was a little bit funny, that Nabokov supplies the date of Candide, but he does not supply the date of Pope's essay on man. You're just supposed to know it. You're supposed to know That's common knowledge, the date of postwork. You don't need to look it up. But he does keep going and give us more information. He says, the tone of Lenski's elegy seems definitely to contain this current echo of optimism. Well, I thought that was funny. What is this seems definitely? I mean, seems is seems and definitely is definitely, and seems and definitely don't seem to go together. So it's almost as if he's sneaking in another joke, but back to optimism with a capital O. The original name of the doctrine propounded by Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz, or Leibniz, spells it both ways, German philosopher and mathematician of genius, and gives us the dates. Well, you know, it's a little bit pedantic, just in case you didn't know that Leibniz can be spelled two ways. He gives us two spellings. And just for today, I looked up a source, which I'm translating for, giving a translation for Leibniz's optimism, but it is the way that Leibniz put it in Essays on Theodicy, on the Goodness of God, the Freedom of Man, and the Origin of Evil. And he said, Leibniz, in translation, this is Sean Greenberg's translation. It is true that possible worlds without sin and without unhappiness can be imagined, but these very worlds would be very much inferior in goodness to our own. For it must be known that everything is linked in each possible world. The universe, whatever it may be, is all of a piece, like an ocean, and the smallest movement there extends its effect to whatever distance there may be. Thus, if the least evil that occurs in the world were lacking, it would not be this world, which, all things together, with no allowance made, was found to be the best by the Creator who chose it. And I think that by taking us back to Pope and then to Leibniz, in a little note on a translation, we have a key to Nabokov's art and to the commentary. It's an ocean. Everything is necessary. Everything's connected. Everything's linked. The world is all of a piece. And everything is there by choice, by the Creator who chose it. And of course, even if Leibniz means creator with a capital C, Nabokov doesn't have to mean creator in the sense of God, but the creators, we know the artists. And then he's got an editorial comment. Voltaire as a thinker was infinitely inferior to him, meaning to Leibniz, and maybe that infinitely is a mathematical reference, whereas Pope's thematic imitativeness is at least saved from ridicule, which Voltaire's criticism is not, by that poet's, meaning Pope's, exceptional talent for placing the best words possible in the best possible order. And here we have, with the repetition of possible, an allusion, as if you didn't know, to the popular form of the cliche version of Leibniz, the best of all possible worlds. And we've got that word best, which is related to good, and by implication to Pope's version, which is right. So Pope is true to Leibniz. Voltaire is a pale copy. And if Lenski's poem is a paler copy still, Nabokov's translation, he tells us, will show his choice to fix all that and to give us back Pope undistorted by Voltaire. So we have a kind of translation as reparation, as restoration, and now, at last, what is right. Now, I could keep going. I actually looked up all of these things, and I definitely wanted to recommend David Rampton's fine article on Nabokov's perspective in the commentary on Voltaire, in which he separates what Nabokov thinks and what Pushkin thinks, and the way that Nabokov renders what Pushkin thinks, and so on. But just to close it, I figured that if you noticed I mentioned pale copies, maybe that reminds you of the magic word pale. I can close by noting that Pushkin's Lenski uses the word blagoslovin, which Nabokov translates as blessed, and which repeats the blaga, as a mediocre poet such as Lenski might repeat a word. But the word blessed itself takes us, of course, to Pope's phrase, supremely blessed, and that road leads, as do so many long and winding roads, to the book written about Pope by that other creator poet who, like Lansky, meets an untimely death. And that takes us to of course, John Shade. Thanks. That's it.
All right, thank you for that beautiful weaving together of so many connections, and I think it highlights how all of these presentations have as a kind of sub-theme this idea of connections to sources, connections to the unconscious, connections to things outside ourselves that we don't understand, but are knocking on our consciousnesses, and of course literary sort of hybridity. So it's always interesting when we have a conference or even these sessions, how when you put certain things side by side, all of these they seem to work together, right, in these interesting ways. So I think we will turn to a period where we can have some conversation. I think probably the easiest way to do that is to use to raise hands using the reactions function. If you want to talk, you can also, if that's not possible, and you want to use the chat, we can also use the chat for that. So I see that Stas has his hand up, so go ahead, Stas.
Colleagues, wonderful to hear you all. Apologies for my somewhat distracted reactions throughout the talk. Anoushka, Steve, Mary, Shoshana, bravo, thank you very much, especially in the middle of a Monday on the East Coast. Thank you. A few questions, and I have, let's see. Something for Anoushka first. Maybe I'll ask them all, and then let's see how it goes, right? So Anoushka, very quickly. In the margins, in the subtext, between the lines, I see Aristotle, his rhetoric, right? When you brought up Ascendanton, of enormous importance and significance for me, for my personal reasons, right? If you could maybe, once again, so this is a rhetorical device that Aristotle brings up in his rhetoric, if I remember it correctly. Haven't had a chance to Google it properly to refresh my memories of it, but it has to do with memory more than anything else, right? How poets, epic poets, remember, and not only remember, but memorialize things. Aristotle brings up one particular bit from the catalogue of ships in the Iliad, how someone who doesn't really mean much on the grander scheme of things is remembered with this very particular rhetorical device. If you could maybe dig a little deeper into this Aristotelian bit in your argument, right? So that's my number one. If I may be permitted to drop a reference in connection with Steve's talk, those dropping petals, there is this teasing, and I don't really know what to do with this bit. There is a Tennysonian echo. The princes, a medley, right? And that's where all these Nabokovian falling petals, the only, maybe even start. The only reason I'm bringing it up is that, of course, he attempted to translate it, never finished this song from that Tennyson. And then for Shoshana, absolutely fascinating the way you take us on this journey. Is it Les Contes de l'Île? There are much more knowledgeable people on this call who talks about poetry being the best of all words in the best possible order. Is there someone else hiding between the lines? colleagues, friends, wonderful to see you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stas. Does anyone want, I don't know if anyone wants to respond to those. If not, we will
Well,
go. Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that one of the things I thought was cute about what Nabokov did is that it's almost a chiasmus. And so, he's changing around the possible words and order possible sort of thing. So it's almost as if, even if it's been said before, he's changing it, but he's attributing the practice to Pope. So I took that as his own little riff on that. That's what I thought. But yeah, it's really amazing how much fun he can have with just a few lines when he seems to be being dry and pedantic, but he's actually expressing something very important. So.
I wish I had something very clever to respond, Stash, but I think I don't know yet. But thank you for asking me, and I will think about it more. But I think that somehow memory has I went all the way back into dreams and subconscious, bypassing memory on the way. But it's important that I go back to it, and I will think about that. So thank you very much for asking me.
And thank you, Stas. Stas. I can also just add one little thing about another image of things falling, since you brought that up as well, which is, so Julian sent a comment to me privately before he had to leave the meeting. There's also that very famous scene of a petal or a leaf that falls down and meets its reflection, right? When flower and reflection become one. So there's also a kind of an iconography of the perfect moment of creativity that Nabokov associates with things falling out of the sky. I guess we could call it inspiration, maybe. So that's all I have to add there.
Okay, we'll go to Tatiana.
I'm sorry, but I think Ariel was first, and then Tatiana. And there was Dana on the way, but she lowered her hand. Okay.
Yes, I think Ariel was the first to raise the hand, so I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay, Ariel.
Okay. Sorry, that was my fault. But thank you so much for presenting. It's a lot to think about. I love thinking about things sometimes, and this was good stuff. So I did have a question. It's not directly related to any particular thing. It's just something I've been thinking about a lot with regard to Nabokov. Something.
The latter.
Sorry?
The second. I suggest the second.
Yeah.
Okay. Second again.
Nabokov.
Okay, thank you. So this is sort of kind of random, but I was in the bookstore, and a review on the cover of this book I read compared one author to Nabokov, and I thought it was such an interesting comparison because the author that was being compared was the one who wrote this book, Brief Interviews with Hideous Men by David Foster Wallace. And David Foster Wallace was kind of more recent than Nabokov, but there are a lot of similarities, like infinite just is 2 words from a Shakespeare play. Pale Fire, also 2 words, also a reference to Shakespeare. And they are very deeply interested in the analysis of specifically US American masculinity, I think. But it's interesting because in Brief Interviews, it's kind of a straightforward kind of thing. Like, of course, that's where the like comparison came from. But weirdly enough, it's like I can't think of them as at all similar. Like, yes, I understand that they were like interested in the same topic, but they approached it from absolutely opposite angles, I think. Because like the thing about like David Foster Wallace was you get the sense when reading brief interviews that he viewed himself as one of the hideous men that was being interviewed. So he is like furious at himself for that. And because of that, there's like this sort of sense of chaos in like passion and rage in brief interviews, especially because I think it was his last published work. Maybe I could but anyway, like you don't get that with Nabokov. Wait, am I saying that wrong? Nabokov. Okay, thank you. You don't get that with Nabokov. There are similarities to his like very intimately crafted understandings of these hideous men. But like he sort of like he crafts them. They are crafted. You get the sense that they're inventions, that they're not, you know, as Anoushka pointed out, like Nabokov's kind of like stated dislike of psychoanalysis. You don't get the sense that he's like being all like navel gazing, and like just using this to explore his own stuff. You get a sense that like he is for sure like taking parts of his experience, but they're like separate from him. And I'm like, that's
I'm gonna
oh
cut
yeah,
you off
sorry.
there. I don't mean to be rude. No, that's fine. No, I think that's a really you know, interesting connection. I would say they both love footnotes as well.
Yeah.
You know. So.
Yes, that's true. I was just going to finish up my long preamble with a what do you guys make of that? Do you make anything of that? Again, I'm very sorry for going on for like 5 hours.
That's okay. You mean, what do we make of the comparison between David Foster Wallace and Nabokov?
Right, like is there something there more than just like these checking a box kind of like, okay, yes, they both do this. But is there something
Wallace said that he liked Nabokov and admired him? Isn't there? I think I've definitely read somewhere that Wallace said he admired Nabokov, like a lot of writers his generation. That's all I can say, and we could trace the source somewhere, I'm sure.
All right. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that. Well, something to think about for sure. I'm going to move on to Tatiana then.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you. All the talks were very interesting. Thank you very much for your talks today. I just have a very short comment. Well, to two of the talks. I'd like first to give a short comment to Steve's talk about chestnuts falling on the roof of a tram, because I think apart from this was very interesting. I've never thought about myself. Thank you. It's all these things falling from the sky. Of course, it's very important. But also, what I think we have here in this specific short story with the chestnuts falling, I think it's also the rhythm. the rhythm. They are formed because Nabokov gives us this rhythmical sequence. And I think it's also important because, of course, we remember other knocks. We remember the knocks in Pale Fire, of course. And also, I think what it reminds me of is Nabokov's poem Slava, which he himself translated as fame. I don't remember it in English, of course, but in Russian, the very essence of this poem is Nabokov. First, he imagines himself as a successful writer in the Soviet Union, and then he rejects all that comes with this fame. And he is in the last portion of the poem. It's a long poem. In the last portion of the poem, there is this very important part where there is just the rhythm. Это тайна, I'm sorry, it's in Russian. Это тайна та-та, та-та-та, та-та-та. А точнее сказать я не вправе. There is I'm sorry, I don't have the English version now close at hand. It's that the main taina, the main mystery of human existence is here in this cipher, and the cipher is only the rhythm. So he's suggesting that is this rhythmical attitude that a human can experience from above. It's a rhythm coming from above. So possibly, it's very possible that there is some connection here, even though Slava is one of his, not really late, it was written in 43, and this short story, Blagost, is a much earlier work. But of course, in Nabokov, there are always these motifs that run through his entire oeuvre. So I think there is something there. Thank you. And also a very short comment to Shoshana's talk. And just I think that it's a very interesting observation, of course. And I think that I just admiring the way Nabokov is weaving this narrative, because of course Lenski, who was educated in Germany, as we know from Pushkin's novel, of course he didn't know English, and he had certainly never read Pope, because English was not a common language even among educated people in Russia at the time. But of course, the way Nabokov traces it to his translation to Leibniz through Pope is very interesting. And thank you for noticing it and to bring it to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana.
I can give a quick response. So yeah, these are lovely examples, Tatiana. Thank you. I guess I would only say I might want to take it one step further, like I might want to turn the screw one more turn, in the sense that, you know, think of the famous image from the first poem chapter, where we have the water dripping off the leaf, and so we have rhythm there. We have leaf, tip, leaf, drip, relief, something like that. So we have water falling off the leaf. We have a rhythm. It's almost as though I mean, I don't know if we have otherworld there, which we have in that secret tra ta 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 ta, which is how he has it in Look at the Harlequins, right? I think is where the translation is given. But so it's almost as though one might suggest that he hints here and there in his works that poetry or art and otherworld are always contiguous. That's a grandiose overstatement for you, just for fun.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Okay, Hannah.
Hi, hello, can everyone hear me? Yeah, great. So I had a question for Marie. So whilst you were talking about Charlotte doing up the home, according to the book, Your Home Is You, and the way she actually kind of became the home and her identity became subsumed in those objects, I was reminded of Martha in King, Queen, Knave, and the way that she is desperately trying to sort of perform a type of social status, you know, with her home and her possessions. And I was wondering if you think that is a struggle on Nabokov's behalf to write women, or whether it is a testament to the power of objects. Because I remember in Lolita the passage about the icebox and it sort of hissing and rasping. So there's that theme of objects kind of coming to life as well. I was wondering what your thoughts were. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Actually, that's one of the things I'm interested the most in, the objects, the everyday objects that Nabokov shed light upon. Indeed, yes, that icebox is another passage I would like to quote because it's really hilarious and it's really interesting how he wove, you know, those ordinary things into his major poetic registry. I don't know if it's a statement about women as much as his own observations of how people relate to objects. And I think he awakens our consciousness to how we relate to things around us, sometimes in ways that he finds ludicrous, and he creates those comic scenes as in Lolita, but sometimes in ways that are quite poignant. I remember, you know, Fyodor saying how his heart was crushed for a cigarette card that was trampled in the mud, and how the pity he had for those discarded objects that we don't pay attention to. And I think it's part and parcel of Nabokov's own acute sense of what lies around him and what is suffering, even if it's an object. So there is, of course, his sharp eye for things that are funny, but I think also his incomparable sense of compassion for people and things around him. So in terms of Martha, I think she's more in the category of, you know, things he found amusing about the way some people relate to signs of like whatever wealth or social status. But that's the answer I would give you. But thanks for your question. Thank you.
And I think Marie, you're next with your question then. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I wanted to say something to Steve, because obviously I think what he told us today about the link between loss and one's attention to the external world is something that is one of the main entries in my book on Nabokov's relation to mundane things. I find that his having lost his home, having lost his usual environment, cast him in a position to look at the world with new eyes all the time. I mean, looking at things that were new. My study of how he relates to the everyday shows, I think, I mean, that's what I've found, that once he's in America, in an environment that's even more foreign to him than when he was in Europe, because of course, Berlin, Paris, London, these are in the UK, these are places that are, of course, are different from Russia, but still there is that common cultural background that is very different from the United States of the 1940s when he arrived. And I found that is there even more attention to objects and those elements from language as well, from the everyday, to be found in his American works, and especially the ones that he wrote in America, Lolita, Pnin, and Pale Fire. I think it's a little different in Look at Harlequins and in Ada, and in Transparent Things. But what I like to think is that looking at outside of your consciousness when you have lost a lot is probably one of his coping strategies to find a sense of happiness and inspiration, like you said. And I find this is a very meaningful and recurring pattern that we find in his stories, but I think in his life in general, how having lost everything allowed him to open up to things around him that the locals don't even see, because they just so used to look at the ordinary things that are covered with this film of indifference that, with the eyes of a poet, an artist, and that of a foreigner, he removes that film of indifference that's covering those mundane things around us and reveals, you know, the potential for wonder, just like what Steve was showing us about this chestnut falling on the roof of the streetcar. So thank you for having pointed to that connection between the loss and awareness of our surroundings.
Thank you, Marie. Yeah, I can add something to that actually relates to to part of your book, I know for sure. Because I know you've written about cigarettes. So at the moment in this story, I guess the third paragraph, it's the moment where he realizes that his beloved is not really loving him anymore. I had come across an empty matchbox on your bedside table. On it, there was a small funereal mound of ashes and a golden cigarette butt. And that funereal mound of ashes is incredible because although the story doesn't talk about death at all, for me, that little funereal mound of ashes is like a tiny little grain of sand that is where Nabokov is putting all of the pain that he's not saying straightforwardly in the story. But it's right there in that funereal pile of ashes, because we all know what a funereal pile of ashes is. And this is only 1924, but it keeps coming up in other ways in his life too, doesn't it? So.
Absolutely. That's the chapter on smoke and cigarettes. There's the whole section on connection with death and how this is a major theme, connecting life and death in a very intense way. Cigarettes are this intense sensations and fire, but also an acute sense of death at the same time. And so this is something that he has carefully, woven into many of his texts. And great. Thanks for that reference, though. I had missed that one. It's awesome. Thanks. I'm going to add that. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought too, Steve, about the just thinking about this connection of things falling from the sky and death and loss. And there's of course that raindrop that falls on Charlotte's grave, and then of course in Pale Fire the wind rolling marbles on the roof, which are those hickory nuts from Hazel's tree, the tree that he associates, that shagbark hickory, and also there's an ice chunk that later on in the poem, this ice chunk that falls from the sky and kills a farmer too. Very different kind of, not very delicate, but so yeah, these things are always occurring. Dana.
Yeah, thank you. So I found that the four papers were so closely interrelated and so beautifully stitched into each other. And I wanted, so I saw Steve's and Shoshana's papers as being the bright side, the light side, the optimistic side of Nabokov, and then Marie's and Anoushka's as the dark side of Nabokov. And Marie, I wanted to start with you because for me, that passage about Charlotte allowing herself to be fashioned by the women's consumer magazines, that reminded me a lot of Tolstoy and how Tolstoy tends to code masculine he tends to code his masculine characters who are negative. So his negative protagonists as being conformists. So I'm thinking immediately of Stiva Oblonsky's portrayal in the opening pages of Anna Karenina, where he is somebody who, exactly like Charlotte, thinks in certain ways because everybody around him thinks in certain ways, and he has completely engineered himself as a reflection of public opinion, of a particular kind of public opinion. So I wanted also to mention in relation to Steve, I thought those chestnuts were the reverse of beneficence. So chestnuts hitting a tram, he's in a tram, right? As he leaves the place of the aborted rendezvous. I thought those were invocations of dread. In our neighborhood, we have acorns falling in the fall on our roofs, and people can't sleep because of that. It's just so kind of shocking in the middle of the night, and so chestnuts would be even more alarming to hear on a rooftop. But I think the entirety of the story is beneficent. Like it is what the protagonist realizes is that it doesn't matter that his lover has abandoned him and has cheated on him, because everything around him is beneficent. And the thing that you didn't mention, but I'm sure you are thinking of it, is the exchange of gifts between the sales lady, the postcard seller who receives a cup of coffee from the guard in the guardhouse of the Brandenburg Gate, and she consumes it with such incredible relish. And then when she returns the dirty mug back to the guard, she decides to give him some postcards as a thank you. And I think that's also a moment of interhuman beneficence, people doing nice things for each other without needing to. I had something to say in regards to Anoushka's too. Anoushka, and I see in your presentation the same kind of positive, negative representation of the dead ones that I saw in Steve's treatment of beneficence. Like in Speak Memory, the dead are grumpy, devitiated versions of themselves. In Speak Memory, they're the reverse. They're bright, you know, they're these wonderful characters, as wonderful as they were in life. And finally, Shoshana, I love your tracing back of all is well, all the way to Leibniz, and this reassurance that all is well. So in spite of the fact that, you know, we have these horrible things, you know, people who leave us in a lurch, people who commit suicide, the Holocaust, to take the kind of worst example of our darkness, Nabokov always retreats into a kind of all is well, a kind of Leibnizian. This is the best of possible worlds, but we need the reassurance that the world is good precisely because it's also so bad, and it's so hard to justify the bad. So thank you. I really enjoyed all 4 papers. I thought that they spoke so beautifully to each other. And thanks, Matt, for organizing.
Thank you, Dana. Wonderful comments. I have nothing to add.
Okay, Francesca.
Hi, thank you everyone for your talks. I found them really interesting. This isn't really a question, it's more a thought, but I was thinking about the kind of idea of conscious design and to what extent the sort of things that have been discussed today are kind of conscious efforts on the part of us as readers or on the part of the narrators or of Nabokov, rather than, or like whether they're things that actually are like subconscious and kind of just come to us. So in terms of the chestnuts falling from the sky, like to what extent, well, like the metaphorical chestnuts falling from the sky, to what extent are they like they're falling from the sky and we're watching them and we're kind of making things out of that, or are we actually kind of grabbing out for the chestnuts? Because like in terms of kind of seeing signs and reading into them as symbols rather than just kind of things that exist, and with Van trying to kind of seek an intimation of his mother beyond after she's died, and he can't because, well, no flowers are falling, and as if like the only intimation can be something that's really the kind of a cliched literary symbol. And yeah, I just wonder like kind of how like the separation between the things that are happening and the symbols, because I know that I don't know, but I think that Nabokov was kind of quite against the idea of kind of pure like literary symbols as being kind of like matched one-on-one, especially in Arda, where he talks of kind of thank God like symbolism doesn't exist and that sort of thing. And in Pale-Fire, I think it's Shade who says the most we can think up is a domestic ghost, and so he's kind of transferring that the intimation that should come from the hereafter to us as perceivers or creators, which is, you know, perhaps the same thing. But yeah, it's not really a question, but just kind of finding that separation between conscious, subconscious, unconscious, and kind of reading into things versus reading out of them, which is obviously quite pertinent to Pale-Fire. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. Anyone else before we wrap it up? If not, let's all thank all of our presenters again. Wonderful presentations and a wonderful discussion. And I was so happy that we had so many people here today. What a great turnout we had. So thank you all, and I wish you a good afternoon and good evening and good night wherever you are. Until next time.
Can we thank you for organizing it too?
Thanks,
It's
Debbie.
it's 3:42 on the East Coast. Just saying.
Yes.
3:42. Perfect number.
Oh, right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody.
I got to run to a meeting, so I'll talk to everybody soon. Bye.